Newsload.
Hi, I'm Carrie Anne Stevenson, and I am here with Newsload, and I am so excited and incredibly honored to be able to interview Rael Wienburg. Hello, Rael. How are you?
I'm doing great, Carrie, and equally exciting to be on your show. So thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to the next whatever time we have together.
So you're from South Africa, I hear in your accent.
Oh, I try to talk. Yes, born and bred in South Africa, emigrated in 77 with my wife, my lovely wife Margie, and twin sons in 77, and we settled in London. And so we've been here for close to 44 years or something like that, 47 years. And just so happy to be in our beautiful city.
And what do you find the differences of South Africa in the 70s to London in the 70s? There was quite a difference, other than obviously the winters.
Well, I mean, South Africa was very modern in terms of technology, etc., but the diversity of the population, where you had and we are going to use reference black and white. There were like 25 million indigenous black people living in South Africa, and the Dutch, who originally came in 1650. The so-called white population may be around 5 million, 25 million, I said black, 5 million white. So there was a challenge in terms of running the country, and it was Nelson Mandela who eventually came out of prison and really was the essence of what happened in South Africa. It was a very smooth or relatively smooth transition from a white dominated government to an equal non-black and white system, like a normal democratic system in South Africa. And we weren't there because that happened after we'd left. But in 77, as you said, it was very dramatically tense times because of the tensions between the political blacks who tried to do different things, but Nelson Mandela in prison was the controller. And when he came out of prison, he immediately met with the white government and worked out a solution, a transition to a truly democratic one person, one vote government.
That's very cool. It's very cool. Now, living in London, Ontario, you have excitedly been able to experience some pretty cool projects. One of the major projects that I'm very excited to hear about is working on Schindler's List with Steven Spielberg. What was that like?
Well, I mean, let's face it, that was incredible in the sense that I got into it through two ways. There were two ways I applied. I was watching Larry King live, who was introducing Steven Spielberg, and they talked about this worldwide project called not Schindler's List. Schindler's List was what they were talking about, but then they moved into the survivors of they talked about the survivors of the Holocaust program, worldwide program. And I was immediately interested because at the time I was a very active videographer and I'm in the Jewish community. So it seemed like a logical fit. So in fact, I applied, they put a 1-800 number on the screen and I applied immediately. But little did I know, the Jewish Community Center also had a connection. So I had a double application, and it was very exciting to get that letter. I have most of it here, but there's no point in showing it, but a letter to say that you've been accepted in the Steven Spielberg Foundation recording Holocaust survivors. And in the end, well, actually, let me explain a little bit about it. This was so well organized, and every interview worldwide, and I believe the aim was 50,000, and whether there were actually 50,000, I've no idea, but that's not important. That was the aim. Each one had to be filmed with the superior equipment. At the time, we had cameras called Betacam, the cameras that the news used, these large, beautifully powerful and very clear cameras. And I had to rent these cameras. There had to be obviously a filmmaker, there had to be an interviewer, and there had to be an assistant for each of the 50,000 interviews. So it was an amazing project. And in London, we ended up doing 26 interviews over about a 3-year period. But I think that's not the part of it that really caught my attention. It was the stories that I heard from these Holocaust survivors and the interviewers, and I think we had 2 in London because they obviously were busy people. They couldn't do every single interview, so they were shared amongst 2 or 3 interviewers, and they had to go to Toronto for maybe a 5-day seminar to learn how to interview people that have been through traumatic experiences. And that's what really made me very impressed with how well organized this whole thing was. Like the first question would be to the survivor, who was very nervous, sitting there. Like 40 years ago, they had this, many of them had obviously traumatic experiences. And the first question is, what was your first toy as a child? And immediately, oh yes, we had a little blah blah. So they got them to relax, and then we worked with these Betacam tapes, and there would be 4 of these tapes for the 2 hours, half-hour tapes. And the first tape was simply getting to know what their lives were like before any involvement with the Holocaust. And then when we changed tapes, the next tape would be, so when was your first? When did you notice something happening to do with what we're talking about? So yes, that was pretty amazing for me, particularly because I was very fortunate to be sitting listening to these stories.
It's a very cool project to be involved in, to be able to hear people's stories, but also be being involved with, Steven Spielberg's project, and being able to share these people's experiences. So I'm very impressed with.
Well, I mean, that's so true. I mean, for my resume alone, as soon as you put that name, Steven Spielberg, on, it opens doors. And it was just, there were follow-ups as well. For example, in Toronto, they hosted all the videographers and interviewers, even the assistants were invited. So it was quite a large gathering of people. And Steven Spielberg was meant to be there to talk to us, to thank us for our involvement. But there was something called the Academy Awards that distracted him. So he couldn't make it. The timing was really off, unfortunately. But what they did, they gave him a little, like a movie camera, and he stood there and spoke into the movie camera for 10 minutes to us. And they actually sent the movie camera to Toronto to the organizers, and they hooked it up to the big TV they had there. And there we're watching Steven Spielberg with a shaking movie because he couldn't hold it still. This is one of the top movie producers in the world talking to us through a handheld little camera. It was very ironic, but we all just laughed. But we appreciated hearing he didn't just leave us in the lurch. He actually acted on it, got the camera in the mail, and so I've got a lot of respect for that man. We never got to meet him, unfortunately.
But still, being able to work on his
Oh,
project,
yes.
even remotely, if you will, back in the 90s, You were modern and advanced even back in the day. It's very cool. I see behind you, is that the Aurora Borealis picture you have
Uh,
behind you?
on my, whoops, on this side, whoops, there.
Yeah.
Yes, that was taken 10 kilometers outside north of London on May the 10th. That's when they had that first big one. And I may have taken 1,000 photographs. And that probably, and if I move to the side, you can see uh, that's a collection of those similar photographs. And then on the other side, of course, you've got the Comet. That was, I think that was in April last year. That was at just off Fanshawe Park Road. There's a lake there, and I took this amazing shot of the comet in London. So yes, all over you've got there's pictures of. This is a room where I basically keep a number of my enlargements.
It's so wonderful to be able to have the lights happening in the London area. We usually have to go so far up north to be able to experience it, so it's quite cool. And your photos are lovely. Did it make the news?
The one behind me that we were looking at, I keep in the anyway. That picture there, um, uh, it's up in many. It's actually in Richie's. They got a copy of that. It was on our local news, I'm sure. I forget. I do send to our local news, to Rita Ishmael, to Julie Aitchison, and also, but also to my friend Heather Hiscox in Toronto. She often, and I only send when it's really topical. I don't bother them, and that's why I think I'm successful getting on, because I don't hassle them with pictures. I only send when there's real interesting stuff happening. And quite often I've sent it like at the last minute, like Heather one year. She really wanted it that morning, and 5 o'clock I sent her a picture of the eclipse or whatever it was, and she was so thankful. She was saying to her boss at the time, we just need that eclipse, and there's the pop in an email, the picture. So I do my best to satisfy what they're looking for. That's why I'm pretty successful at that.
So, a really exciting experience that I actually was honored to partake in was your pitch to Dragon's Den.
Well, that was quite the experience, quite the frustrating experience that we've never seen it on TV. I think that's the only downside, but everything else, as you pointed out, was uh, phenomenally successful in terms of um, that. I think it was 2013. Believe it or not, it's 11 years ago. I In January, I said to my wife, I said to Margie, my life is great. I have wonderful children, wonderful wife, wonderful blah, blah, blah. But it's boring. I'm not doing anything. So I said, from this year onwards, I'm going to do one big thing each year. And at the exact moment I said that, on TV at the bottom of the screen, we're watching Dragons Den. There was auditions in London, Ontario, came up on the screen at that moment. So we're talking about just unbelievable luck. I could have been away from the TV. So I wrote down the number, called the number, and a month later, or whenever it was, I think it was in April, I think it was 2013, I went to the audition up at the university, or somewhere up there. And that's what kicked it off. But the incredible thing was, I assumed that there were 70, 60, 70 other pictures there, that I've had the experience. I was there. There were Dragon's Den directors, none of the people that are on the show, but producers were there, and they had big posters with the dragons on them. And so I had the experience, and I, to be honest, I forgot about it. I'm wrong. It was in January. And I by March, I'd absolutely forgotten about it. And about the beginning of April, I get a phone call. Hi, this is CBC. And I pick up most of my phone calls at home, and you get calls from duct cleaning services. So I said to this guy, CBC duct cleaning service? And there was this pause, and the guy says, no, this is CBC Dragon's Den. I was devastated. I apologized profusely. And then, if I remember correctly, the guy had a good laugh. And he said, you know what? He gets the same thing at home with his duct cleaning services.
But the
Anyway, so
pitch,
the
tell me
bottom
about
line,
the pitch, the pitch.
well, I mean, that was the start. Then I had to come up with something. So my brother had talked about these drinks in Singapore or somewhere, and I came up with another beer. Would you like another beer? You hear that in bars and restaurants. Hey, would you like another beer? I'd love another beer. So I actually went and trademarked it, and I was really shocked that I actually got the trademark. And really, that was the beginning of, as you know, that was the beginning of everything, is to push it. And then, as you know, we went to auditions. I can't even now remember the sequence of everything, but in the end, they decided the powers to be that we weren't to be included in the show itself, which is obviously the main what you want to do. But the experience in Toronto, showing up there, waiting half the day, and then being on screen, being in the actual Dragon's Den studio with you and my team sitting there, it really was a great experience. And I think it was successful only for one reason, is you were a big help, and you refused to just sit back and be the present, what do you call it, one of my helpers. You decided to help me with rehearsals, and we did at least two or three, and one with Courtney, I think, and maybe Doug came to that one as well. And I think that's what made the actual pitch so successful, is that I was comfortable, because I know the first time I stood there with Margie, and a friend was sitting at the couch, and I said, I'll do my pitch. And I just stood there and looked at him, and I just couldn't do it. So, yes, it was a remarkable experience.
Absolutely. Rehearsal is so important, just to be able to get it, through. I talk to so many comedians and presenters, and sometimes I hear from them and they say, oh, I was just winging it. And it makes me so nervous, because rehearsal and getting it, prepared and organized is so important to me. Now, the only other question I have about the Dragon's Den experience is when you stepped up and after the presentation, Arlene said something to you.
Yeah, she said lekker. Now, lekker in the South African Afrikaans means nice, very nice. And I wasn't aware, I didn't do any research, that Arlene lived in South Africa for 7 or 8 years. And so that's the last thing I was expecting. I was expecting Jim Treleving to come up with something, or David Chilton, and then Arlene says lekker. And I was like, fortunately, Arlene's a professional, and she saw I was caught by surprise. So she jumped in and said, so you were from South Africa? So she got the conversation going, and it was very smart of you to remember that, because that was the beginning of, I think, a pretty successful pitch once we got going. And then suddenly the picture, what do you call it? Not the no, not the pictures. What's their part of it?
Negotiation.
The negotiations took place, and Arlene and David were really determined to grab me 50-50 partnership, which I was thrilled with. And then Jim comes in and says, no, 80-20. I keep 20% and they get 80%, which I was happy with, because all I wanted was a percentage of the beer here that you can see in the background. If I get my 20% of 2 million beers that they sell in the next 5 years, I'll make a fair amount of money. And then Jim pipes up, no, to hell with that. Let's go 50-50. And I think, as you know from some of my responses regarding this, I felt like jumping over onto his lap and thanking him for this incredible offer, but that never happened. I
I
did
really
shake that
like,
huge hand of his. Yes,
yeah.
pardon?
Well, he's a former cop, so he's a big guy.
He's huge. His hand
Yeah,
was massive. I remember
yeah.
that.
I really like how creative you got with the design and development of another beer. You have the dragons on the case, and each beer I remember you labeled them, like one was a pilsner with Arlene on it, and another was like a lager with Jim on it. I thought that was really cool.
But I'm going to be fair enough and say it was my son Rob, who I think did help me with the design. The um, uh, the, the the designs on the bottles were no, I think it was Rob. I think he did everything. So I really thank Rob for that. In fact, I mean, it was never done. It was never produced. It never went ahead. But at least I've got the memory.
Yeah.
That's great.
So you were also on a show with Jason Mamoa. It was C.
Yes, it was this bizarre scenario where the world was inflicted by a pandemic. And guess when we were meant to be filming this whole thing was in 2020 with COVID, or 2021. So it was like the most bizarre scenario. Um, thousand, oh no, there were 800 of us meeting in the St. Thomas Psychiatric Hospital at 4 in the morning, standing, freezing. I can't remember. It must have been beginning early part of the year, and we find out that the premise is the world population has been wiped out by a pandemic, and only 2 million were left, and that's where the whole story revolved around. And here we were in this desolate place, freezing like hell, and and then COVID. So I think we were there for the first day, and basically there was just the registration and getting measured and getting our dresses and our makeup and stuff. But the second day, we actually again, I think the call up was 4:30 in the morning or something, and we arrived there, and uh, we were actually did some stuff. There was the actors that came on horses up the one road, and they had drones. Well, the drones wouldn't be in the video because this is so-called very raw times, but the drones were recording everything. It was just the whole atmosphere was exciting. And as we spoke about earlier, we had this. It was an incredibly bright day, and the producers were so upset because there was just too much sun. And so I pointed out to one of the producers, you've got a huge tractor there with a big shadow thing there. Why don't you use that? Or big, like a board, massive thing. And he looked at me and said, we've totally forgotten about it. So they brought that above us. Anyway, so that was phenomenal until we got an email that night that it's over because of COVID.
Yeah.
Because 800 people, it could have been 600. I'll tell you why. There were two huge rooms where we met and ate. And there's 300 people shoulder to shoulder at the time when COVID was spreading like crazy. So I think they've suddenly realized this is not going to work. We're either going to have a pandemic, I mean, a disaster, or stop the show. And they stopped the show. Eventually, about a month later, they probably 3 in the morning or something, they removed. They had about 20 huts, beautiful like clay or whatever huts with grass like roofing, uh, to create this village. And that whole village was moved overnight back to Toronto. And so they
Wow.
never came back to finish it when the COVID, I think they finished the movie in Hamilton. So that was quite a disappointment because I would love to have been part of that, the whole sequence, and to meet Jason Momoa, of course.
Oh yeah, Jason Momoa is a dreamboat for sure. Well, you've lived a very exciting life, Rael, and we're running out of time to continue to ask any more questions and topics. But I guess the biggest question is, how do we follow you? How do we keep track of any projects that you're working on?
Wait for the second part to this series that we're going to do. No, Carrie, at this stage of my life with my retirement, I'm not encouraging people to follow me. So I'm not going to, not that that I don't want to help you, but I just feel that I don't have a specific, I mean, I have my Facebook and I have other stuff, but nothing that I feel, I mean, if you've got my name on the screen, they could look me up, but I'm not, I don't have a site that people could, and I'm modest or whatever. I don't feel I want people to start looking for me for any other reason. That I'm having a wonderful life, and that's good enough for me.
Well, that is good enough for me as well. You've had some phenomenal experiences and so many more things to talk about. I think you're right. We might need to have you back to continue talking.
Up to you, as long as you check off the list. But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And one last thing, if you don't mind, if you can say it loud, say it proud. I love Newsload.
Oh, I love Newsload. Absolutely. Yeah.
This is the Newsload.